All right, well, let's talk about Isaiah chapter 14 now. So this is continuing with the same revelation basically that we were talking about last week or yesterday as well in 13. So in this one, we're getting more into millennial stuff. So what's going to happen during the millennium, basically. So these are the things that even in our day and age, we can look forward to. So these are still things that either are in the process of somewhat happening or will be happening, basically. More of the millennium, so more of it's going to be what's coming, basically. It still hasn't happened. So verse 1, for the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, and the stranger shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Now this is, again, some duality here in Israel's, these Hebrew prophecies, basically. This is talking about, of course, a gathering of Israel. There's so many times, and we've seen this a lot through the Old Testament, where they talk about a remnant will return. There's a remnant preserved. We're going to see that even more in Isaiah and in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, as we talk about these destructions from Assyria and Babylon, that even though they get destroyed, a remnant will remain, and they will return. So there's literal gathering of Israel, but this is also the spiritual gathering of Israel. So this is helping to gather God's children together. Who are God's children? The house of Israel. Whether you are literally a member of the house of Israel or you are adopted into the house of Israel, it doesn't matter. If you're going through baptism and keeping your covenants and those kinds of things, you are of the house of Israel. So physically, this is literal going to be the gathering of Israel, and spiritually, this is the gathering of the people together, missionary work. So that's going to happen. Now, verse 2, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids. They shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. So this is talking about how Israel will have helpers. Israel will have people that will help them, basically. Possibly other nations could literally be helping gather Israel together. This is, from a literal standpoint, could be like the United States helping to recognize the nation of Israel, other countries aiding in helping to encourage Israelis to gather to the nation of Israel. There could be other people helping in this. This is, from a spiritual standpoint, this is the church helping to gather people in, saying, come, be with us, work with us. But in verse 2, there's a part that's not so spiritual in here, saying that basically the countries that saw you as their servant will be your servant. They are going to help. So some of that still hasn't happened all the way yet. There's possibility other nations that will say, oh yes, we have kind of used Israel as a tool or a resource for us, but now we're going to help be a resource for Israel as Israel grows and does more. I think this taps into a longer theme, and this might be an appropriate time to bring this up. There's a longer term theme that's happening with the gathering of Israel. We'll hear this again more, see more about this as we go through the rest of the testimonies of the prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, those as we continue on. But here's the higher or the longer term view or perspective of this, okay? So the Jews got the gospel first, and they had it for a very long time. And then centuries and centuries and centuries. And then in the New Testament, the Jews then take the gospel to the Gentiles. That lasted okay and then kind of fell apart with the apostasy and things. Some of the ideas and concepts stuck around in Christianity and kept going. In the last days, so this is that first shall be last, the last shall be first. In the last days, the Gentiles get the gospel first, and then it goes to the Jews. And we know that as we look at, we're in the times of the Gentiles. This is started, I'm trying to remember where in the Doctrine and Covenants it mentions this, but it talks about how when the restoration of the gospel was the beginning of the times of the Gentiles. So Gentile nations are getting the gospel now and are being blessed and prospered because of their righteousness. Granted, that is a bit of a decline right now because we're transitioning. we're seeing a transition where the Gentiles have had that gospel, and now there's a decline as they're taking it for granted, getting lazy with their God, with their religion things. That whole pride cycle is kicking in. As it goes down, the Israel will eventually come up. So there's a transition. Gentiles are getting it first. They're having it for a while now, a couple hundred years, and now it's going to eventually go to the Jews, and the Jews will then take over. When this happens, so we're going to see larger transitions of basically the Middle Eastern area, and the Gentile main nations now will start to do this. The gospel will start transitioning this way. Economics will probably transition this way. A lot of power and influence in the world will go this way as well. So the Middle East could see economic improvements as everybody else goes into economic decline. There's going to be some challenges and things that happen with that. But those are longer term trends. But that's what they're talking about here. Is as the Jews gather, they will get to a point where the people who they were servants to are now their servants, basically. A very long term, like centuries and centuries, to have this pattern work its way out. But that is there. So think about that. Whenever you hear the first shall be last shall be first, we're in that last shall be first. Gentiles got it last the other time. Now we get it first this time, but it's transitioning towards non-Gentiles having the gospel. So Middle East, possibly even Asia to an extent, we'll see this transition happening, and we'll see it in a way that won't be like, oh my gosh, this is a gospel miracle. It will just happen, and we'll feel like it's normal, because that's the way it usually goes. It just seems culturally and economically and politically normal, basically, and that'll happen. So if you're not paying attention, you'd never know it's there. But now that we're being told that this is here, we have something to watch for and look for. All right, verse 3, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear, from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. So again, they're saying there's this transition that's going to happen. Verse 4, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased. Now, if we look at this, there is more on this one so this is 2 Nephi chapter 24 is Nephi quoting Isaiah 14. Basically, these two go together. So in here, it says, verse 4, 24:4 is the same, and it shall come to pass in that day that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased. So that's these two are the chapters you can compare together, basically. In fact, verse 2 that we read, that the people shall take them and bring them to a place and help them. Verse 2 in 2 Nephi 24 says, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, yea, from far to the ends of the earth, they shall return to their lands of promise. House of Israel shall possess them, the land of the Lord shall be for servants and handmaids. They shall take them captives unto whom they were captives, and they shall rule over their oppressors. So again, there's still that transition, but realizing that Israel's going to take over their area that was promised to them by God, and then they will possess it. And that'll be a place for them to live and to do things. So this is all leading up to the millennial reign, all these things that are happening, basically. So this verse 4, let's go back to verse 4 here. Isaiah is basically given a song. That's when it says, thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. So Isaiah is given a song to sing that is literally and metaphorically about Babylon. So again, we get to see the duality here. So during the millennium reign, wickedness of the world basically will fall. Righteousness will prevail that's the spiritual sense of this song and this prophecy so Babylon represents the world, the wickedness of the world. So while we're literally, this is a prophecy saying Babylon will fall. Now this is a prophecy that's given while Babylon is still under Assyrian rule to an extent. Assyria is still the big nation on the block. And Babylon's a small vassal state, but it is going to turn into a big area and then take over everything. And then they're going to be like, oh my gosh, Isaiah said this, but Isaiah said they're going to fall. How can they fall? They're like the king of the world. They're the dominating power now. But they will fall, and they'll fall to the Persians. So that's what he's looking at. Now, verse 5, the Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. So just saying all the efforts of the wicked, all the efforts of Babylon are going to fall apart. So as much as Babylon becomes a dominating power in the world, as much as Babylon takes over everything, they are going to collapse and fall apart, and it's going to be swift. So this is a good metaphor for us, realizing that wickedness will grow until wickedness kind of dominates everything, takes over everything. So to be righteous means to be a minority. That is a thing of the last days we have to understand. To be righteous means to be in the minority opinion. So if you feel, when you read the news or you look out at what's going on out there, if you feel like you are a minority, then you're in a good spot. If you feel like you fit in with everything else that's going on, if you feel the cultural ideas that's happening around you are just fine, everything is fine, everything's awesome, if you don't feel like the world is marginalizing you and pulling you out, you might want to reconsider your opinions and ideas around religion. Just saying, if you feel like the world is, if you feel like religion is changing to fit the world and going in that way, and so it's like the way the world believes and the way religion seems to be coming together, you might want to be careful with that, because you might find yourself on the wrong side of this line. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to point to a political opinion or anything else like that, because they're all wrong. They all have lots of flaws and problems with them. What I'm saying is, from a standpoint of God's perspective, those who do not follow him will become the popular opinion. The wickedness, the people who aren't following God and his commandments, will become dominant and will become popular, will be the main theme of things. So if you feel comfortable with how the world's going, you might want to be careful. If you feel like you're a minority in there, like following God, keeping his commandments, following him, seems almost illegal. Like it's so hard because everything else has gone the opposite direction. You almost feel like you're doing something illegal by worshiping God. That's the transition that's gonna happen. So that's what he's talking about here. But it won't last. It will fall apart. And in the millennial reign, it's going to be different. And so verse 7 is getting into this idea of millennial reign. The wickedness will be destroyed. Verse 7, the whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. That is peace. There's no contention, no arguing. Are we there? No, we're not there. There is an insane amount of arguing and contention in the world today. There's wars, there's challenges. The whole earth is not at rest. I think everyone's easy to say the earth is in commotion. When we get to 10 chapters ahead in chapter 24, we're going to talk more about this. So pay attention to that. We're going to talk more about climate change and the book of Enoch and stuff and how this pulls together. But here's the thing for us to think about for this chapter. What is it going to take for the whole earth to be at rest? It's going to take a lot. It's going to take the millennium, the welcoming of the Savior, to get to that point. We have to get to a point where the contention and craziness gets so bad we finally realize this doesn't work. We don't like this. We need to change. We need to change. So when we realize collectively as a world that arguing and contention is not getting us where we want to be, war is not actually helping us accomplish what we want, that's when things are really going to change and we can start to see that ushering into the millennium. Until then, it's just going to get more arguing, more contentious, and more that way. And it doesn't have to go that way. It doesn't mean we're set in stone that it has to get worse. It will probably get worse. But we can, if we were to help enough people believe in Christ and follow him, we could avoid some of that. So that's missionary work. How can we improve our missionary work in helping other people learn and understand Christ? So let's talk about this great time that is coming in the future for us. Verse 8, yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. The trees are going, yay, you're not cutting us all down to build stuff, to build things. You laid down, basically. Now, B, it's interesting in here. There's a couple of things. If you look at the fir trees, they're talking about cypress trees. A fir tree is a pine tree, basically, but they're talking more about cypress trees, cedars of Lebanon. Since thou art laid down, 8b is the footnote. It means in death. Since most of you have died, nobody has come against us, meaning there's not a lot of people around anymore, so we can thrive. Wilderness can thrive and take off because the human population is dramatically cut back. Famines, pestilences, destructions, and war has cut the population back. So there's peace, there's those opportunities. Now, verse 9, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. Now, what do you think that means? If hell is rising up to meet you, it knows it's got you. It knows it's coming for you to capture you. The wickedness is so crazy that hell just can't wait to take all those souls in, like a trap, basically. Now, when we talk about hell here, we're talking more about spirit prison. I've learned, and this is, I can't say any, member of the apostles or anything has taught this. I've noticed that there's different. We talk about the word hell, but we mean three different places, three different types of hell. Spirit prison is the most common one we see. We saw that in the book of some of the writings of David in Psalms and Proverbs and things. Spirit prison is the most of the one you'll hear of when it talks about hell. Outer darkness is one, but that's rarely, if ever, talked about. And then being left out of the celestial kingdom is one. We see that one more in the Doctrine and Covenants and Book of Mormon than we do in the Bible. But those are some different references to hell that I think is utilized. We use that word hell to mean one of those three things. So it's important when we see the word hell to understand, are we talking about spirit prison, which most of the time we are, which is a temporary hell until the day of judgment, and then we get decided where we go. There's outer darkness, which is literal hell where Satan and his followers live. But that's not talked about very much because it's not an option for the overwhelming majority of us to have to worry about because of the grace of Christ. So we don't have to worry about that one as much. But I've noticed that some prophets talk about anything less than celestial kingdom in a way could be considered hell. And that's another interpretation of it as well that we can look at. And I mean, if you know what it takes to get to the celestial kingdom, you know that your works, being baptized and stuff will help you get there, and you choose not to do it, that kind of might be a hell for eternity to go, man, why didn't I just do that? It wasn't really that hard. Why didn't I just be good? Why didn't I just keep the commandments? I wish I could go back and do it now because I'm stuck and because I can't have what I thought I was going to have. This is kind of like a hell, reminds me of that. There's a video, a milk commercial I did a while ago where this guy is like a jerk. He like pushes an old lady off a curb. He's on his cell phone yelling at people. He fired people. He ends up walking off a curb himself. He gets hit by a car and he dies. Shows up in this room. He wakes up on the couch. He gets up. There's this big, bright white room he's in. He's like, oh, this is amazing. He sees there's this table. He goes over to the table. Massive chocolate chip cookies. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is so cool. Picks up a cookie, eats it. Oh, this is great. And he notices there's a fridge. And he's like, oh, sweet. He goes over, he opens up the fridge. It's nothing but cartons of milk. And he's like, oh, my gosh, I must be in heaven. He's just thinking this is amazing. Grabs a carton of milk, goes to open it, goes to pour it. None. There's no milk. Starts searching through it. He's just running through all those cartons of milk as much as he can. None of them have milk in them. And then he's standing there for a second. He goes, where am I? And that's when it goes to the got milk logo and it's on fire. You know, like you thought you were going to heaven, but you went to hell. You've got a plate of cookies and no milk to dunk them with. So a kind of funny thing, but that's, you know, if you knew you could have better and then you don't end up having better, that could be kind of like a hell. So I think that's why some of the prophets have used it that way. But again, most of the time you're not going to see it in that phrase. So here's the thing. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. So when you die, hell's not waiting for you to come to them. Hell's coming to you, basically. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. So this grasp of hell, of Satan on what's going on is going to be really strong, basically. And that eventually will be broken, that grasp, which is nice. Verse 10, all they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? So this is basically saying that these are the kings going, you fell into the trap too, huh? You've got it as bad as us, basically. The other thing to think about with verse 10 as well is the kings and the mighty people will realize they're no better off than the average person. Everything's been destroyed. There are no kingdoms and things. It's all equal. It's like, well, what do we do now? We're all kind of equal now. We're finally seeing each other on an equal plane. There's no economics. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have. If you can't get food, you're out. You know, you might have a lot of wealth, but a poor person might know how to find food. What's going to be important in that moment, you know? So there's a lot of equality that's going to happen. Verse 11, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols, the worm is spread under thee, the worms cover thee. So again, there's no pride in death. When you die, if you die in your wickedness, you still die. It doesn't matter how much money you have when you die, you still die. Money doesn't go with you. It's gone. All the pride, all the destruction, all the wealth is gone. Verse 12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? So this is talking about a specific person named Lucifer. Now, we typically equate Lucifer as Satan, the one who betrayed God and Christ, and the war in heaven, things like that as well. I want to pause on this for a second. There's some interesting scholarship, biblical scholarship around this word and this description that I want to just bring to light, to talk about, to help us to be better educated in what we're doing here. So this is an English translation of the Latin word Jerome used when translating from Hebrew and has been used as a traditional name of Satan. The Hebrew word is helel ben-shahar, which means shining one, son of the dawn. So that's what Lucifer means. That's why they called him in that verse son of the morning, because in Hebrew it means the shining one, son of the dawn. This is a sarcastic reference to a Babylonian king whom the author thinks is rather haughty and arrogant. So remember, this chapter is talking literally about Babylon, but metaphorically, spiritually, talking about the end of the wickedness of the world and things as well. So from a literal standpoint, if you're looking at this from a biblical scholarship standpoint, they don't deal as much with the metaphorical or spiritual meaning of things. They're dealing with literal. What can I prove? What can I make from a logical argument standpoint? And so when they look back at the words that are used, this is what they're finding. Now the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Bible, the Old Testament, the Septuagint references this different as a reference to a lesser god associated with the planet Venus, also known as the morning star. So Jerome follows this interpretation. So in the Septuagint, when they moved it to Greek, some Greek philosophy came into here of not just talking about a king of Babylon, a future king of Babylon that is going to be super prideful and then fall. And we know, because we can read ahead to the book of Jeremiah and see that's probably Belshazzar, or Belteshazzar, which is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, basically. He was the king of Babylon when Persia came in and took him over. So that's most likely the Babylonian king that is talking about literally. But metaphorically, the dualism that's in here is important for us, because spiritually it's talking about how, again, Babylon is a type and a shadow or a symbol of the wickedness of the world. It'll rise up, it'll take over, dominate everything, destroy the old ways of doing stuff, bring in its new way of doing things, and then it'll collapse and suddenly go away real quick, basically. So now, this is, let's move on with this. In fact, this is the only place in the Bible that says Satan is Lucifer, is this chapter in Isaiah. These were not connected until the early 2nd century, so it is not an idea that originates in Bible teachings, but is something that was interpreted later by early church fathers. So this is I learned some of these ideas from watching some of Dan mcclellan's videos. He is a Bible scholar. He is entitled to his own opinion of things as well, which is fine. But when he talks about some of these data-driven ideas, we should not ignore that data. I think that's still important for us to look at. We can choose whether we like his interpretation of it or not, but we can't ignore the data. And the data says this isn't literally. This is not intended to mean, the Satan of the world, but it does fit. And so it tells us not just literally what's happening, but also metaphorically what is coming to happen in the future. Okay, the millennial reign. And that's okay to have that dualism in there. We have it a lot in the Old Testament. So most scholars, this is from the Old Testament study manual, most scholars think Lucifer, son of the morning, is the king of Babylon, probably Nebuchadnezzar or his son. In the symbolic use of Babylon, Babylon is spiritual wickedness, and the kingdom of Satan, Lucifer, is Satan. This interpretation is confirmed in the latter-day revelation of section 76, verses 26 and 28. Satan and Babylon's prince, both represented by Lucifer in this passage, aspire to take kingly glory to themselves, but in fact will be thrust into hell, where there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. So we can see this literally and symbolically, spiritually. It's okay to see it both ways and understand how this works. So this is talking about the future destruction of Babylon, which again is still a bit of a vassal state, literally at this time in history, but it will grow big and then it's going to collapse. And Isaiah is prophesying this is going to happen. So let's move on to verse 13 as we continue to think about this dualism that's happening. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. So this is him still mentioning these things, as Babylon is going to believe they are just as good as God, basically, which was not uncommon. In fact, it's interesting, in verse 13, the word congregation, Kyle and Delich in their Bible commentary actually translate congregation, where it says, I'll sit also upon the mount of the congregation. They translate that to, I'll sit upon the mount of the assembly of gods. So again, there's that plurality of gods that's in there, basically. The Godhead is possibly what it is. Maybe there's more of a council in there as well. There's a few ways we could look at that. I believe there's a possibility to put a heavenly mother concept in there. There's a patriarchal and hierarchical priesthood coming together in that congregation. So they're trying to exalt themselves. Now, Satan, we know, he tried to do that hey, if I'm going to go down and I'll put this whole plan in place, God, I want your glory. Give me your glory. Make me equal to you, because I'm going to force everyone to come back to you. And Christ said, nope, I'm going to give you the glory, God, but I will sacrifice and do what I can to help these people out. And so that still follows with what we understand about Satan himself, as well as, of course, the king of Babylon is going to make himself believe he is just as good as God because of the power he has. In fact, verse 14, it goes on, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So again, this king is going to elevate themselves and make themselves believe they are the bomb. They're everything. They're the major. But that's not going to happen. They're going to be dragged down. So again, you shall be brought down to hell. This is Satan brought down to outer darkness. This is the king brought to spirit prison to pay for his sins, basically. So you can kind of see verse 15 both ways in that understanding of hell. Now verse 16, they that see thee, shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble and did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. So they're going, wait, this is the guy that like we were afraid of him, we followed him, we did what he wanted because he said he was this almighty person. Now he's nothing. We see him in a whole different light. He's powerless. There's nothing there. So this is what they're talking about. Now we'll see this with Babylon. Like, oh, we were afraid of you. Babylon was all powerful, but now you're nothing, basically. And then same with Satan, this dualism that Isaiah is giving us of Satan will, as the world grows wicked, Satan will feel like he is the king of the world. He runs everything, but it'll all come crashing down. Everybody's going to go, why did we listen to you? Why did we not follow God? Because you're nothing now. So that's our important ideas. Now, for the Old Testament study manual, they say, in still another example of Isaiah's beautiful dualism, even the kings of the world lie in their tombs in respect, but Babylon's king was to be cast aside and trodden underfoot. This reward was literally visited upon the city of the Chaldees, and through Nebuchadnezzar was certainly buried in great splendor. There is no grave found for him today in the ruins of Babylon. Think for a moment of Satan's grave, never having received a body. He shall never have a tomb or monument of any kind, though he was king and ruler of the great worldwide and history-wide empire of spiritual Babylon. No wonder the kings of the earth, who though wicked in mortality, could still inherit the telestial kingdom, would marvel at his demise. So realize, through the grace of Christ, even these wicked kings are not going to outer darkness. They're not going to the place where Satan is. They're going to a kingdom of glory because the grace of Christ allows them to go there. That's the default, is a kingdom of glory. To go to the outer darkness, you have to go read section 76 of Doctrine and Covenants. You have to make a choice to go to outer darkness. If you don't make that choice, you default to a kingdom of glory in the next life because of the grace of Christ, not your works. Your works determine which of the 3 degrees of glory you go to, but you get to go to one of those 3 because of grace of Christ. Without the grace of Christ, outer darkness is all there is. Technically, spirit prison and spirit world is all there is. But that's where the grace of Christ comes in. So what they're saying here is, even all these people are like, dude, the kings at least got their honor. You know, we look at the Valley of the Kings in Egypt and all the pharaohs that were buried there and their wealth and their might and power and influence and these other great kings. But the king of Babylon will be unknown, and we still don't know where his grave is. And Satan's going to be the same way. There's no monument to him. There's no memory to be had of him. He's just gone, basically. It's not worth it. So this is the Satan's power is going to be gone, and there's nothing he can do about it, basically. Now verse 20, thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers never shall be renowned. People prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with the cities. So this is what we're going to see. So basically this is saying, prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers. That sounds harsh, but what they're saying is, we are not going to let the next generation do this. We're going to either wipe them out and start over or retrain them, basically. We're not going to let another evil generation rise and take over. So the descendants, the followers are gone. We're not going to let this happen again. The line of the kings will be broken, basically. It's not going to come back. Verse 22, for I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord. So again, no more family. No more name carry forward. Not only is Babylon going to be gone, their genealogy is done. They're not going to have ancestors. They're not, or descendants of them, excuse me. They're not going to have any descendants of them because the kingship is going to be destroyed. And as well, Satan's wickedness and his followers will be destroyed. Now, verse 23, I will also make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. Now, other translations talk about, use animals like owls and porcupines instead on this one, but they're being swept away. A possession for the bittern is, and pools of water. I'll sweep it from the besom of destruction. It's going to be cleaned up. It's all the destruction, all the wickedness will be washed away, basically wiped out. Verse 24, the Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. As I have purposed, so shall it stand. There's the decree. Bam. This is going to happen. I guarantee it. That's the thus saith the Lord type talk right there. That this is what's going to happen. Babylon's going to rise up and be the dominant force. It's going to get destroyed and it's not going to come back. It's just gone. What happens for the millennium? The wickedness builds up. It's going to destroy the wickedness. Satan will be cast out at the end of the millennium and no more wickedness. It's gone. No more continuation. It's out. We move to the day of judgment. We move on from this existence basically to the next one. Verse 25, so there's a colon at the end of verse 24. So this is kind of the Lord saying, here's my decree. Here's what I'm putting forward. Verse 25, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him under foot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders. So basically, Assyria is going to be destroyed. Just like you can say, just as I used Assyria to destroy you, I'm going to destroy Assyria as well. Verse 26, this is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. So what this is saying is, my plan is to eventually destroy all nations. So one thing to think about is, in order for the Savior to return, I mean, it's going to be hard when he returns and says, I am the king, all people should follow me. I'm going to kind of govern the world now. If there's an established nation, they'll be like, hold on, Jesus, what's going on? I'm still a ruler in my nation. You can rule other people's nations, fine, but you're not going to rule my nation. And so to come at a time when there's lots of nations is not a time that would be easy. And so the nations need to go away for Christ to come. What is it going to take for nations to go away? A whole lot of destruction. Wars, famines, natural disasters, other things. We haven't even seen the full extent of that yet. That's still coming. So just realize that that's what's going to happen. The world is going to be in commotion. The nations will be destroyed and gone for the most part. And then Christ can come back and go, okay, rally to me. Let me bring you all back together under me, basically. Verse 27 now, for the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched out, and whom shall turn it back? So again, who's going to stop what God says, basically? Just as Assyria was ruined when they seized Jerusalem, so the nations of the world will feel the judgments of God. The destroying angels slew their army overnight. Could this be literal in the last days? Could natural disasters fulfill this? I think there's a good chance of that. Who's going to stop all the world's nations from being destroyed. God decreed it. Who's going to stand in his way? Who can stand in his way? Nobody. It's going to happen. Now, verse 28, there's a bit of a timeline mark made here. In the year that King Ahaz died, was this burden. So this is about 720 BC. This burden or message of doom was prophesied. Okay, they're kind of putting this in here. So this is what we're going into now, is kind of this other prophecy here. So verse 29, rejoice not thou whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Now that might sound strange, like what does this really mean? What's going on with this? Well, let's talk about this a little bit. Okay. This quote here is an Old Testament study manual as well. It says, these verses reveal the judgment of destruction, which Isaiah lived to witness against Philistia. So this is the Philistines that he witnesses against. The Philistines were longtime enemies of Israel, and warfare between the two peoples had gone on for centuries. They controlled parts of the Holy Land's coastal regions, though their power waned considerably from the time of David on. In Roman times, the Holy Land was known as Judea until the Jewish revolt of AD 132 to 135, after which the Emperor Hadrian changed the name to Syria Palestina to show the Jews that they had no claim there any longer. So the area was known as a Jewish area, but after 135 AD, the area was destroyed, Jews scattered, and so a king Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian, so this is Roman Empire, comes in and says, you know what, we're going to reshape this whole area so the Jews don't have claim anymore on it, basically. Now, the King James Version used the Latin form and called it Palestina, but what is meant here is Philistines, not Palestine, as the terms are used today. The Assyrian Emperor Tiglath-Pileser captured the Philistines about the time of the death of Ahaz, king of Judah, who had made an alliance with him. In spite of the hatred of the Philistines and their persecution of Israel, the Lord's people were established in the land. In like manner will Zion be established, while all her enemies will be powerless to make it otherwise, but they will fall. So if you remember, Judah, the northern kingdom, and then Syria up with Damascus, northern kingdom sides with Syria, they get wiped out. Palestine made a deal. The Philistines said, hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so let's combine our forces. We're a bunch of smaller regional armies. Let's combine our forces against this national Assyrian army that's marching on everybody. That didn't work. Judah said no because God said to tell them no. God said, don't make alliances. If you go back several chapters, they talk about this. Don't make alliances. You need to trust in God. And so Jerusalem did that, although quite reluctantly, and it worked. They stayed safe from Assyria, even though everything else went away and was destroyed around them, basically. So that's kind of what this is talking about here. So what's interesting is it's saying, if it says here, okay, the rod of him that smote thee is broken, for out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice. So Assyria is this serpent coming in to take you out, but the serpent will go away, and out of that serpent will become something more venomous and dangerous. The cockatrice, which is a venomous, another venomous type snake or lizard, basically. And his fruit will be a fiery flying serpent. So not just a snake slithering on the ground that's poisonous, a flying serpent that has fire on it. So a way more formidable enemy that is going to obliterate you and destroy you. That's Babylon. What can be worse than Assyria? Well, Babylon's going to prove it can get worse. So now this is really fascinating, the idea of this fiery flying serpent. If we remember, last time fiery flying serpents were talked about was Moses' time. You remember the serpents came up out of the ground, they bit everybody, everybody was sick. They had to look to an image that Moses created of the serpent to live. Now, most people, if you got to go back and watch our video on that in the book of Exodus, most people believe that it was a serpent, kind of a staff with a serpent coiled around it. But a lot of scholars now believe it was actually a staff with a serpent perpendicular on it, so it looked like a cross, basically. Those who looked to the cross lived. Those who didn't died. So tons of metaphor in here of understanding the way to live, the way you're going to survive all this destruction is by trusting in God. That's kind of the hidden message that they're trying to get across to these people here. Look to Christ, look to God to live. Don't look to your neighbors to help you. Now verse 30, and the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lie down in safety. And I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay thy remnant. Howl, O gate, cry, O city, thou whole Palestina art dissolved. For there shall come forth from the north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. What shall one then answer the messengers of the nations? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. So again, all these nations are going to be destroyed, and Israel will be gathered back together and be restored once again. So that's what they're talking about here. Literally, spiritually, they're saying that in the last days, the wicked will get super powerful, super popular, and then it'll be destroyed. And the Zion will be established. The poor will look to it for refuge and help, and everybody else is going to be afraid of it. Realize Zion is here. The messengers have come back. There is a kingdom that has been established, and it is mightier and powerful and much crazier than anything we ever have. So we either need to worship with them or avoid them. That's what is coming, the beginning of the millennium. And then that will end with the destruction of the wicked for one more final time as we get into the day of judgment. The righteous are brought up, and then all the resurrection happens. Satan is cast out to outer darkness, and all that happens as well. So it'll happen one more time, this pattern, at the end of everything else, the end of the millennium, basically. So lots to unpack in chapter 14, lots for us to think about. Look forward to reading your comments about this. What do you think about this? Where I don't want to say where do you think we're at in this, because that's getting into speculation of the last days, and very rarely are we going to be accurate on that. So let's jump into the next chapter as we continue to study Isaiah.